Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will wire up our Firestore database that we created with our add contact functionality of our contact app. So let's dive right into it. I'm looking at the Firestore database that we had created, and what I want to do is first read the documentation on how to use the SDK that we imported in our VS Code. In order to do so, I'll click on Go to Docs at the top right hand corner. That'll take me to all the Google Docs related to all the different SDKs they provide. So this can be pretty lengthy to read through. So let's navigate a little bit. We will go to the build section, and in the build section, we can see all the products that we had seen in the dashboard. One of them was Firestore. So that's the one I'll select. And in the Firestore and the left-hand side in the sidebar, there's a few options for me to work with. I can work with introduction, get started. I do want to start working with adding a managed data. So I do want to add a contact into my Firestore. So let's start from there, and let's click on add data. That should take me to the documentation for adding data into Firestore. In add data documentation, first let's work with what do we need before we begin. And before we begin, we need to initialize Cloud Firestore. And in order to do that, it's giving us some sample code, and it looks a lot like what we had done in the previous video. In the firebase.ts file, we had const app, and then we have to do something for DB to get Firestore app. So let's copy over some of this code into our VS Code to get started. I'll go back to VS Code, bring up the firebase.ts, and let's compare it to. I'm exporting app. I'm also exporting analytics. That means I need to export DB or const DB, and that is going to be like so. So I'll copy paste it as is right there. And then it is missing get Firestore. So that's being imported from Firebase Firestore. So Firebase SDK that we installed has subdirectories for different projects or different products that we can work with. In this case, Firestore. So Firebase/Firestore gives us the SDK for Firestore specifically. So I'll import that up top. Right here should work. And that should give me all the things I'm looking for. I do need to export all of these out. So let's just do that really quickly. Export, export, export. That should go. All right, so that's before we begin. That's the portion we had to take care of. That's taken care of. Next, we should look at how the data structure looks like. So scroll down to where it says data types. And in the data types, this is what a document can look like. It's just an object that we have been working with. It can be a type of string, Boolean, a number, timestamps. We're going to be working with those very soon in this video, actually. It can be array type, array of number, Boolean, string, doesn't matter. It can be null. It can be object within an object. So it can be nested, and then that object can also have another nested object. So that's what we'll be working with. I'll go all the way to the top and skip over a bunch of this documentation and go directly to add a document. That's the one I want to work with. And to add a document, I need to import doc setDoc from Firestore and pass it the DB instance that we are exporting from firebase.ts and follow the convention like so. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'll go back to my VS Code. I will go to context. That's where I have my add contact functionality. I will start refactoring our add contact, and we'll see the benefit of TypeScript now, because when we refactor, if the types don't match, it will tell us different areas where we need to refactor as well to make the code work, which will be very valuable. So in my contact context, add contact, the name string and the description string is fine, but it will not return a number anymore. It will return a string. In Firestore, IDs are string. I could work with number, but I just want to rely on Firestore as much as I can. So I'll work with their built-in string IDs. And it will be a promise because it is going to make a server request using internet. That means it can't just give us the information right away. It has to await it. So how do we do that? Using TypeScript, I'll say promise. In the diamond bracket, I return something. In this case, I will not do void. It will be a string type. And that should finish our documentation portion of it. Now you can notice in our IDE, we can start seeing some squigglies. On line number 29, it's telling me that -1 no longer is a valid return for the initial value for add contact. So I'll say this will be returning a new promise. Promise will have a resolve function, which will be returned right away with a string value, which is an empty string. So that should be fine for a dummy initial add contact function. Let's go further down and we have more squigglies where add contact no longer satisfied the documentation that we are working with. So let's start implementing our add contact using Firestore. First thing I'll do is change the return from a number to a promise return of string ID. And the next thing would be, this will be an async function now. We will be making a request over the internet, so it won't just happen right away. It has to await, and I'll comment out the rest of the code. And let's go over to Firestore documentation and copy over some of the code from there. In the Firestore documentation, in the add a document section, we do have a set doc. I don't want to use set doc because that assumes that I will generate the ID and pass the ID. I don't want to generate the ID. I want Firestore to generate the ID for me. In order to do so, I have to use the add doc function. That's the one that I want to copy over. So I'll copy the full method here. I won't copy the imports. We'll do that auto importing. So I'll copy the rest of the lines and paste them directly inside add contact. Let's do auto import here. So add doc will come from Firebase Firestore. That's true. Collection will come from Firebase Firestore as well. Yes. And DB will come from our utils folder firebase.ts file that we created earlier. Next, the argument that it needs is the collection name. Our collection name will be contacts. This is all related to contacts right now. There we go. And once that is awaited, I will provide it the data, and the data would be name that we get in the param. And then for the other one, it will be description. There will be another param that we get, and we pass it down to Firestore. Next thing, we get a reference in return from Firestore. And a reference in Firestore is basically the functionality of the SDK wiring up to what the collection or the documentation would provide us from the database. So using reference, we can do some things like get the data, make more queries, go deeper into the document, go deeper into collection, so on and so forth. We will be working with a lot of that in the later videos, but that's what a reference would do. And I will use this reference to get the ID that Firestore creates for me, and I'm going to return that. Instead of console logging it, let's just return it. And that should satisfy my add contact functionality. I'll delete the rest of the lines and save. That should make my add contact work. So let's try it out. I will go to my browser this time. Instead of using the simple browser, I'll go to my Firefox browser. I'm zoomed in a lot. That's fine. I will split the screen so we can see Firestore at the same time as the contact app. So I've split my screen. Let's see what happens when we try to add a new contact. So I'll click on new, name, something, and submit. And on the right hand side in our Firestore, if I click into it, I think I have to refresh my page here. So I'll go ahead and refresh. And there we are. We now see a new collection called contacts. And inside that, there is a contact with an ID that was generated by Firestore, so I couldn't really guess it. And on the right hand side, inside the document itself, I can see the name and the description working just fine. I'll make a few modifications though, because there are a few things that entities in the database should have, or document in this Firestore database should have, that we can work with, such as date that the document was created, date that the document was updated. So those things that we should have in the document, I'll add those in right now. So let's quickly do that. I'll go back to VS Code, and where I have the description, I will say created at. I'll work with the server timestamp API that Firestore gives us, so server timestamp, and we call that as a function, and that should do just fine. Same thing for updated at. We'll put the same timestamp. That means when it created, that's when it's updated last time anyways. So I'll go ahead and save that, go back to testing my app, and let's create a new contact. This time it will be called something else, submit. And when I do so, I can see the contact got added, and this time created at and updated at are showing up just fine. All right, with that done, with the add contact functionality working, I'll see you all in the next video.